Good afternoon. We have another short statement we'd like to make. We very much welcome the decision of the Portuguese authorities to release details of a man seen by a witness here in Praia de Luz on Thursday the 3rd of May, the night of Madeleine's disappearance. The release of this important information followed an earlier meeting that we had with senior Portuguese police officers. A meeting that Kate and I both found to be amicable and very constructive. We feel sure that this sighting of a man with what appeared to be a child in his arms is both significant and relevant to Madeleine's abduction, and we would appeal once again to anyone who may have seen him or anything else suspicious on or around the 3rd of May to come forward and tell the police. For instance, was this man seen anywhere else in or near the town with a child, or what appeared to be a child? Which direction was he heading in? Did he have a vehicle? Whether you are a local resident or a holidaymaker who has since returned home from Portugal, any information, no matter how unimportant you may think it could be, may be vital in helping the Portuguese and British police to find our daughter. As we said yesterday, we wish for nothing more than to bring Madeleine home with us safe and well. Kate and I would also like to make it clear that, as this is very much an ongoing police investigation, we will not be making any further public statements for the time being. Thank you.
The disappearance of Madeleine McCann on May 3, 2007, from apartment 5A of the Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz, Portugal, centers around a critical 90-minute window from 1840 to 22 that remains riddled with contradictions. At 1840, David Payne, a friend of the McCann family, claimed to have seen Madeleine in the apartment's living room. This sighting is widely regarded as the last independent confirmation of the child's presence. Crucially, no additional evidence, photographic, testimonial, or forensic, has ever corroborated his statement. By 1900, Jerry McCann was reportedly playing tennis, leaving Kate McCann to look after their 3 children. The exact time Jerry returned to the apartment or left for the tapas restaurant remains ambiguous. Some sources place him at the tapas bar around 2030, while others suggest a later arrival. This uncertainty sets the stage for a fractured timeline, the so-called Tapas 7. A group of friends dining with the McCanns that night claim to take turns checking on the children. However, the intervals and nature of these checks are inconsistent. At 21:30, Matt Oldfield stated he entered the McCann's apartment, but did not physically confirm Madeleine's presence. He merely noticed the bedroom door was open wider than before. This failure to verify the children's well-being added a layer of negligence to an already murky narrative. At approximately 22, Kate McCann reportedly discovered Madeleine missing. The bedroom window was open, its shutters raised, and the curtains were blowing in the breeze. Kate immediately ran back to the tapas bar, shouting, "They've taken her," an assertion that perplexed investigators. No signs of forced entry were observed. The shutters were intact. The window showed no fingerprints. How, then, did Kate arrive at the conclusion of abduction so quickly? In the ensuing chaos, the scene was contaminated by over 60 people entering and exiting apartment 5A. Police failed to secure the perimeter. No roadblocks were established. No house-to-house searches occurred that night. From this disordered beginning, the investigation would be shaped, some say doomed, by a foundation of uncertainty, broken timelines, and unanswered questions. The nightly child-checking routine practiced by the McCanns and their friends, collectively known as the Tapas 7, was anything but consistent. Despite claims of a rotation system to periodically inspect the children left alone in various apartments, testimonies from the group reveal notable discrepancies in who checked when and how thoroughly. At 21:30, Matt Oldfield reportedly entered apartment 5A to check on the McCann children. Rather than visually confirming Madeleine's presence, he merely noticed that the bedroom door was open wider than it had been earlier. He did not step far enough into the room to see the beds clearly. This failure to ensure the children were safe, especially in a foreign country, in an unlocked apartment, amounted to a serious oversight. Then, at approximately 22, Kate McCann returned to the apartment and discovered Madeleine was gone. The window in the children's bedroom was wide open. The external shutters were raised, and the curtains were billowing in the breeze. Kate ran back to the tapas bar in a state of panic, reportedly shouting, "They've taken her." The immediacy and certainty of this conclusion, that Madeleine had been abducted, raised eyebrows. There was no physical evidence to support the claim. The shutters were not broken. The window showed no signs of forced entry or tampering. No fingerprints, no footprints, and no witness accounts of anyone leaving the scene were reported. The room, in fact, appeared untouched aside from the open window. Adding to the confusion, several guests and staff members later testified that the chaos began around 21:58, 2 minutes before Kate's reported discovery. This seemingly minor time discrepancy could, in a case hinging on minutes, shift the entire timeline of the investigation. It also begs the question, was Madeleine already missing when Matt Oldfield checked? Or had something happened earlier? Why, then, was Kate so convinced that someone, pluralized as they, had taken Madeleine? Who did she mean by they? And why such certainty, in the absence of any visible struggle or break-in? These questions have never been fully answered. Investigators were perplexed by the specificity of her alarm, especially given the lack of any intruder's trace. To some, it seemed like maternal instinct. To others, it felt rehearsed, an emotional performance staged to establish a narrative before facts could catch up. Either way, that moment, "They've taken her," marked the beginning of a mystery that would fracture public opinion and define the case for years to come. Beyond the fractured timeline and the suspect cry of abduction, it was the aftermath, the institutional response, that delivered perhaps the most irreparable blow. While media narratives would soon focus on Madeleine's parents and potential predators, what received far less scrutiny was how the investigation was set up to fail before it even began. Portuguese authorities, responding to what should have been treated as a high-risk child abduction, behaved as if a pair of sandals had gone missing. There was no coordinated lockdown of the resort, no sweep of the surrounding villas, no mobilization of border control or airport surveillance. Hours passed with no alert system activated. Witnesses were not immediately separated for interviews, allowing versions of the story to cross-contaminate. Basic policing protocols, elementary in other countries, were inexplicably ignored. Inside apartment 5A, the scene descended into chaos. Friends wandered freely. Staff tried to comfort. Police arrived late, took sparse notes, and left the apartment unsecured for hours. By the time forensics returned with dogs and tools, the site was a social hall, not a crime scene. Any scent trail Madeleine might have left, out the window, across the patio, down the street, was now buried under dozens of foreign footprints and cigarette ash. What emerged instead was a rush to narrative. Abduction, declared within seconds. Chaos, allowed to flourish. And a family already commanding media channels, shaping the public story while the official one lagged behind. It was not a cover-up in the traditional sense. It was worse. It was institutional inertia, the kind that lets crucial hours drain away while everyone stares, stunned, unsure of who's in charge. From that moment forward, every lead would be tainted, every contradiction harder to untangle. The system didn't just mishandle the case, it neutered it. The silence Madeleine left behind was immediately filled with noise. But not truth. The forensic trail in the McCann case, far from providing clarity, introduced layers of contradiction that deepened the mystery. In July 2007, 2 months after Madeleine vanished, 2 British cadaver dogs were brought to Portugal. Specially trained to detect the scent of human blood and decomposition, they delivered alarming results. The dogs alerted at 11 separate locations, including the corner of the bedroom in apartment 5A, Madeleine's beloved cuddle cat toy, Kate McCann's clothing, and, most damningly, the trunk of a Renault Scenic the family had rented 25 days after the disappearance. Yet when forensic teams analyzed the samples collected from these sites, the results failed to deliver conclusive proof. The DNA found in the vehicle's trunk, while suggestive, was ruled legally ambiguous. It contained a mixture of genetic material, which experts stated could include Madeleine's DNA, but also matched other family members. In court or in science, that is not certainty. It is noise. This dissonance between canine alerts and inconclusive lab results polarized opinion. Skeptics questioned the reliability of the dogs without corroborating forensic confirmation. After all, scent detection, though powerful, is not infallible and has no place as standalone legal evidence. But others, including seasoned detectives and cadaver dog handlers, noted that such specific and repeated alerts are rarely false positives, especially when clustered around personal items and a car rented weeks after the event. For them, the dog's behavior raised the specter of a corpse once being present, possibly within that apartment. This deeply challenged the prevailing abduction narrative. If no intruder entered apartment 5A, and if no body left visibly that night, how could decomposition scent appear in such specific, intimate locations? Critics of the McCanns saw the dog's alerts as circumstantial indicators of something far darker, a potential death concealed, and evidence quietly relocated. Supporters of the McCanns, meanwhile, insisted the alerts meant nothing without scientific proof, arguing that dogs may have been missold by handling errors or cross-contamination. In the end, the forensic evidence did not clarify the case. It fractured it. Science offered possibilities, not answers. And in those spaces between certainty and speculation, suspicion only grew louder. Among the many anomalies in the McCann case, the unexplained disappearance of two physical objects stands out like open wounds in an already battered investigation, a refrigerator and a tennis bag. Both vanished without documentation. Both were last associated with locations or individuals central to the case, and both have since become the focus of unsettling speculation. First, the refrigerator. Sometime after the initial investigation began, the original fridge in apartment 5A was removed and replaced, quietly, without official explanation, and without any record in the forensic logs. Why would anyone relocate a kitchen appliance from a potential crime scene? More pointedly, why wasn't this move documented by Portuguese police or the Ocean Club management? Theories quickly emerged. One of the most disturbing suggested that, if a fatal incident had occurred on May 3, the fridge might have been used, however briefly, to conceal a body before disposal. Given that both Kate and Jerry McCann are trained medical professionals, familiar with human decomposition timelines and preservation methods, this hypothesis, though never proven, has continued to linger. Then there is the tennis bag, described by witnesses as large enough to hold a small child. It was routinely carried by Jerry McCann to and from the tennis courts during the family's holiday. On the day of Madeleine's disappearance, it was last seen shortly after Jerry's 1900 match, and never seen again. Unlike the fridge, this item was not tied to the crime scene, but rather to the father of the missing child. The bag's absence sparked its own storm of speculation. If Madeleine had died in the apartment, the bag could have served as a discreet means of transporting her body, out a back door, over a low wall, or into a waiting vehicle. No one has confirmed where either object went, or why they disappeared. But in a case defined by what cannot be proven, their absence has become a silent scream, implying that something was moved, something was hidden, and someone knows. Whether these items are red herrings or keys to the truth, their vanishing adds weight to a chilling possibility that concealment began long before the police even arrived. The McCanns' medical backgrounds complicate the case in ways that few are willing to admit openly. Jerry McCann is a cardiologist, Kate McCann, a general practitioner. Both are intimately familiar with human anatomy, the stages of decomposition, and the forensic implications of trauma and time. This knowledge, rather than shielding them from suspicion, casts a long shadow over the choices they made, or didn't make, after Madeleine vanished. If Madeleine had died accidentally, say, from a fall, a misdose, or an unknown medical event, both parents would have been equipped with the clinical awareness to understand what an autopsy might reveal. In that light, a hasty decision to conceal a body becomes more plausible. Not just out of grief or panic, but out of calculated fear. What might a coroner have found? A blow to the head, a sedative in the bloodstream, These remain speculative questions, but they exist because the McCanns, unlike most, had the means and motive to understand what needed to be avoided. Yet this clinical logic clashes with their immediate emotional claim that Madeleine had been abducted. Kate McCann's cry, "They've taken her," was delivered within seconds of discovering the open window and empty bed. But the scene didn't align with an abduction. There were no broken shutters, no forced entry. The Portuguese police would later confirm that the window frame showed no signs of tampering. Kate's insistence that it had been jemmied open directly contradicted physical evidence. Why make such a claim? Was it panic, or was it narrative construction? When viewed alongside other anomalies, missing objects, inconclusive forensics, and inconsistent witness statements, a darker pattern emerges, not of malevolence, necessarily, but of management, of optics, of a story being shaped before investigators had time to form their own. Was the abduction claim a cry from the heart, or a shield from the truth? In the absence of a body, a confession, or definitive evidence, suspicion has settled into the silence and refuses to leave. Jerry McCann's behavior in televised interviews has long been a subject of public scrutiny and psychological analysis. While his wife Kate often appeared visibly emotional, at times even withdrawn or tearful, Jerry projected a markedly different persona, controlled, articulate, and at times unsettlingly composed. Viewers and experts alike have noted moments of what has been described as duper's delight, a subtle smile or flash of amusement when discussing the disappearance of his daughter. In particular, when posed with straightforward questions such as, "Did you notice anything suspicious that night?" Jerry's answers often veered into long-winded, abstract tangents, avoiding the question entirely. These meandering responses have fueled speculation that he was consciously managing the narrative. On more than one occasion, he paused before answering, offered vague or overly detailed recollections, and occasionally smiled when discussing deeply emotional topics, behavior some psychologists interpret as indicative of internal conflict, even concealed guilt. It is not necessarily evidence of wrongdoing, but it raises the question, why the disconnect between the content of his speech and the emotion it ought to convey? In stark contrast, Kate McCann's interviews have been described as raw and restrained, often characterized by minimal words, direct phrasing, and visible sorrow. She avoids speculation and rarely elaborates on events beyond what is necessary. This contrast in communication styles, Jerry's verbosity versus Kate's quiet distress, has led some observers to theorize a potential imbalance of knowledge between the two parents. Could it be that one knows more than the other? Could Jerry's role have extended beyond what has been publicly acknowledged, with Kate either unaware or complicit only in silence? The theory of co-offending, in which one partner bears the truth while the other remains emotionally reactive yet uninformed, is not new in criminal psychology. It emerges in cases where control over a shared narrative is critical, and where the emotional responses between partners become misaligned. In the McCann case, this disparity has only intensified public skepticism. The issue is not merely what was said, but how it was said, and whether the story, as delivered, was truth or performance. In a mystery marked by missing evidence, behavioral clues have become a kind of shadow testimony. The behavioral inconsistencies in the McCann case find striking echoes in the lesser-known disappearance of Lily and Jack Sullivan in 2005. The siblings, aged 6 and 4, vanished from a family vacation home in rural Massachusetts under similarly murky circumstances. As with the McCanns, public suspicion quickly shifted from hypothetical intruders to the parents themselves, not necessarily due to hard evidence, but because of how they spoke, how they acted, and what they failed to say. The Sullivan father, like Jerry McCann, gave interviews that were evasive and frustratingly vague. His timeline of events on the night of the children's disappearance shifted subtly in different accounts. He avoided direct questions, spoke in generalities, and seemed at times oddly detached. His reluctance to discuss critical moments mirrored Jerry's tendency to answer in abstractions or divert attention from the emotional core of the narrative. In contrast, Mrs. Sullivan displayed visible emotional distress in her few public appearances. Her short, often tearful statements were raw and unrehearsed. Like Kate McCann, she appeared to be genuinely mourning, even as the investigation remained unresolved. This emotional asymmetry between the parents in both cases led some observers and criminal profilers to float a chilling theory. Perhaps one parent was in the dark, while the other knew far more than they were admitting. Not collusion, at least not in the beginning, but a possible cover, uprooted in unequal knowledge. Both sets of parents also faced harsh public backlash for what many saw as reckless parenting. The McCanns left their 3 young children alone in an unlocked apartment while dining at the tapas bar. The Sullivans, too, left their children unsupervised in a poorly secured rental home in an isolated area. In both cases, what began as poor judgment quickly morphed, rightly or wrongly, into suspicions of neglect, and then into darker theories of involvement. It is this haunting parallel, 2 vanished children, 2 sets of oddly misaligned parents, that continues to bind the McCann and Sullivan cases in the public imagination. Neither has been solved. Both remain shrouded in silence. In the Sullivan case, a missing suitcase became the symbolic counterpart to the McCanns' vanished refrigerator and tennis bag. An ordinary object transformed into a potential vessel for something unspeakable. The suitcase, once seen regularly on the property during the family's vacation, disappeared without explanation in the immediate aftermath of Lily and Jack's disappearance. Investigators quietly entertained the theory that it may have been used to conceal and transport the children's bodies, echoing the suspicions around the McCanns' rented Renault Scenic and the large tennis bag last seen in Jerry's possession. Further unsettling the picture were the cadaver dogs. In both cases, these highly trained animals alerted to the scent of blood and human decomposition inside the family home and vehicle. In the Sullivans' case, alerts were triggered in the trunk of the family SUV and near a laundry room inside the house. But like the McCann investigation, the forensic follow-up yielded ambiguity. No identifiable DNA was recovered. No traces could be definitively linked to the missing children. What remained were the alerts themselves, circumstantial, haunting, and unresolved. Also paralleling the McCann timeline was a notable delay in reporting. The Sullivans claimed they didn't realize the children were missing for nearly an hour. Critics found this implausible, given the age of the children and the setting. The McCanns, too, were questioned for not immediately contacting the police after Kate's discovery. Both delays, however innocent they may appear, were seen by some as calculated pauses, designed to stage the scene or construct a coherent narrative before authorities arrived. Perhaps most damning, both families swiftly blamed outside interference. The McCanns declared abduction. The Sullivans insisted an intruder had entered and taken the children. Yet neither claim was supported by physical evidence, no forced entry, no witnesses, no digital footprints. To investigators, this premature certainty raised red flags. Why reach for the conclusion of abduction before ruling out all other possibilities? In both cases, the rush to name an external threat felt less like shock and more like strategy. And in that calculated certainty, many saw not clarity, but the first true mystery. The professional backgrounds of the McCann and Sullivan families cast a long shadow over both investigations, subtly reframing them from cases of tragic loss to potential exercises in strategic concealment. The McCanns, as medical professionals, a cardiologist and a general practitioner, possessed more than a basic understanding of trauma, decomposition, and forensic procedures. This expertise, far from exonerating them in the eyes of the public, raised uncomfortable questions. If something had gone wrong, would they have known how to mask it? In the Sullivan case, the family's comfortable middle-class status also became a point of scrutiny. While not medically trained, they were educated, socially aware, and financially stable, capable, in theory, of understanding how to manipulate perception, delay suspicion, and navigate law enforcement procedures with cautious precision. In both cases, This level of competence fed into a chilling possibility that what looked like clumsy panic might actually have been controlled damage control. Across both disappearances, behavioral inconsistencies and missing physical evidence aligned to form a disturbing pattern. Neither family showed the full spectrum of expected emotional responses. Both homes lacked signs of forced entry. Both relied on speculative intruder theories before investigators could establish basic facts. And both had enough social capital to initially steer public perception in their favor. Taken together, the parallels suggest more than coincidence. They hint at a shared psychological model: parents under pressure, caught in an unthinkable moment, and choosing silence over confession. When the McCanns were officially removed from the list of suspects in July 2008 due to insufficient evidence, public focus and investigative resources pivoted toward external perpetrators. It would take over a decade, however, before a new primary suspect emerged: Christian Bruckner, a German national with a long, predatory criminal history. In 2020, German prosecutors named him as a suspect in the Madeleine McCann case, a development that reignited global interest, but also raised new complications. In 2007, at the time of Madeleine's disappearance, Bruckner was living just 1 mile from apartment 5A in Praia da Luz. He resided intermittently in a dilapidated farmhouse and in a VW camper van, both of which allowed him mobility and concealment. His criminal record was extensive and disturbing: multiple convictions for sexual abuse of minors, burglary, and drug trafficking. To many, he fit the psychological profile of a child predator operating under the radar in a tourist-heavy region. One piece of evidence gave investigators reason to dig deeper. On the evening of May 3, 2007, at exactly 21:01, just minutes before Kate McCann discovered Madeleine missing, a 30-minute phone call was made using a prepaid mobile device. Cell tower data placed the phone within proximity of apartment 5A, and authorities later confirmed the call was made to and from numbers linked to Bruckner. While the content of the call remains unknown, its timing and location are deeply suspicious. Adding to the intrigue, Bruckner sold his Jaguar the very next day and abruptly left Portugal. Years later, German police would uncover troves of disturbing material buried beneath the body of a dead dog on his property: 8,000 files of child abuse content and numerous children's swimsuits, some allegedly kept as trophies. Still, no direct forensic link has ever been established between Bruckner and Madeleine. Without DNA, a witness, or a confession, the case remains circumstantial. His name looms large in public discourse, but in the eyes of the law, he remains uncharged. In the vacuum left by absent proof, Bruckner is both the prime suspect and yet another shadow: provocative, plausible, but ultimately unconfirmed. By 2016, German authorities had uncovered disturbing physical evidence that painted a clearer, yet still legally inconclusive, portrait of Christian Bruckner. During a search of one of his former properties, investigators found over 8,000 files of child sexual abuse material buried beneath the carcass of a dead dog. Alongside the digital archive were 75 children's swimsuits, items believed by some to be trophies, a chilling hallmark of serial predators. This discovery confirmed Bruckner's deep entrenchment in the world of child exploitation, yet it still stopped short of tying him directly to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. In 2013, Bruckner had reportedly sent a message to a friend in which he wrote of his desire to catch something small and use it for a few days. The phrasing was so precise, so depraved, that many believed it to be a veiled confession. Adding to this unease was testimony from a former cellmate, who claimed Bruckner once bragged that Madeleine didn't even scream. Still, hearsay, even when horrifying, does not constitute admissible evidence, and no forensic trail linked him to apartment 5A or to Madeleine's DNA. In May 2023, German and Portuguese authorities conducted a highly publicized excavation of the Arade Dam, an area Bruckner once referred to as his little paradise. The search, guided by GPS data and Bruckner's known travel patterns, was among the most extensive to date. Divers, drones, and ground-penetrating radar were deployed over several days. The results, however, were anticlimactic. Investigators recovered only fabric fragments and animal bones. No trace of Madeleine was found. No breakthrough emerged. By January 2024, German prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters publicly admitted what many had feared. There was still not enough evidence to formally charge Bruckner in Madeleine's case. Without a body, a witness, or a forensic match, the case remains circumstantial. And time is running out. Bruckner, currently imprisoned on unrelated charges, is scheduled for release in September 2025 unless new indictments surface. In the end, Bruckner may be the most plausible suspect never prosecuted. A man who leaves a trail of horror but no signature. A predator in the shadows, possibly inches from the truth. Yet legally, still untouchable. Another name that haunts the periphery of the Madeleine McCann case is Martin Nie, a convicted German serial child killer whose pattern, proximity, and methods introduce a disturbing layer of complexity. Active during the early 2000s, Nie was known for targeting young boys, often abducting them from camps, schools, or dormitories while posing as a staff member or guardian. His ability to use fake identities and blend into environments designed for children made him an especially insidious predator. In 2007, the year Madeleine vanished, Nie was confirmed to be operating in Europe and had previously worked with children's outreach programs in regions not far from Praia da Luz. His presence in Portugal has never been definitively documented, but intelligence reports suggested he frequented areas along the southern European coast. Although his known victims were male, investigators have not ruled out the possibility that Nie could have deviated from his typical victim profile, especially in a situation where opportunity aligned with impulse. What makes Nie particularly alarming is his psychological profile, calculated, organized, and highly mobile. He operated across borders undetected for years, exploiting legal blind spots and fragmented international databases. Despite this, Nie has never been officially questioned about the McCann case. There is no record of his interrogation, extradition request, or inclusion in joint task force proceedings, an oversight that experts describe as a glaring failure in cross-border coordination. There are no travel logs, phone records, or forensic evidence placing Nie in Praia da Luz on May 3, 2007. Yet his absence in the case files may say less about innocence and more about institutional neglect. In a case defined by what remains unseen, Martin Nie is a specter, never in the spotlight, but never fully dismissed. In the Sullivan case, investigators briefly turned their attention to an external suspect, referred to as John Doe, a pseudonym for a man with a criminal history of petty theft and trespassing near the family's vacation home. On the surface, Doe appeared to fit the profile. He was known to roam the area, had no fixed residence, and had previously been charged with breaking and entering. A witness claimed to have seen a pickup truck similar to Doe's near the property on the night Lily and Jack disappeared. A partial boot print, unaccounted for by the family, was also found near a rear entrance. But like Christian Bruckner in the McCann case, John Doe's connection to the crime never solidified. The timeline didn't quite match. Surveillance footage was inconclusive. The boot print was too degraded for positive identification, and crucially, there was no forensic link. No DNA, no fingerprints, no confession. What seemed promising soon dissolved into circumstantial haze. Both cases became mired in the same frustrating pattern. External suspects with plausible opportunity and criminal history, but no definitive tie to the missing children. These suspects were easy targets for a desperate public and overwhelmed investigators. Yet their emergence also served another function, diverting attention from closer, more uncomfortable possibilities. In both the McCann and Sullivan investigations, the spotlight on outside predators created the illusion of progress while sidestepping internal contradictions. As potential leads collapsed under scrutiny, suspicion quietly drifted back toward those closest to the victims. Sometimes, the most elusive truth is the one hidden in plain sight, not behind the mask of a stranger, but behind the practiced face of familiarity. The McCann family's media campaign, unprecedented in scale for a missing child case, was both a masterclass in image management and a source of enduring controversy. At the center of this operation stood Clarence Mitchell, a former UK government spokesperson, who assumed the role of the McCann's communications director. Under his guidance, the family dominated headlines, secured interviews with global media outlets, and kept Madeleine's face in public view for years. But as the campaign evolved from awareness to narrative control, critics began to question not just the message, but the messengers. Gerry McCann, in particular, became a polarizing figure. His interviews, carefully constructed, yet curiously evasive, often drew scrutiny. Viewers noted his tendency to smile at inappropriate moments, deliver convoluted answers, or deflect direct questions. This behavior, according to behavioral analysts, was suggestive, not of guilt necessarily, but of someone managing more than just grief. His inability or unwillingness to address specific timelines or observations fed theories that he may have been withholding key information. In contrast, Kate McCann's media presence was comparatively subdued. Her responses were brief, emotionally raw, and rarely veered off topic. She appeared physically drained in interviews, often gripping Madeleine's cuddle cat toy. Her effect seemed aligned with genuine distress, prompting some observers to theorize a knowledge gap between the two parents. If something had gone terribly wrong that night, an accident, a panic-induced cover-up, was it possible Kate didn't know the full story? This contrast in media behavior, one parent guarded and verbose, the other fragile and direct, became a psychological Rorschach test for the public. For some, it reinforced the McCann's humanity under pressure. For others, it suggested asymmetry, both in emotion and in truth. In a case where facts are scarce and perception shapes narrative, the McCann's media presence was not just a tool. It became part of the mystery itself. In the Sullivan case, the parents also found themselves under a harsh public microscope, not only for their actions on the night their children disappeared, but for how they managed the narrative in the days and months that followed. The father, in particular, adopted a posture of distance and control, refusing most interviews and communicating only through terse statements delivered by legal counsel. His aloofness was interpreted by many as evasive, even calculating. Meanwhile, the mother appeared occasionally in local media, often emotional and overwhelmed, but notably vague in detail. The imbalance echoed the now familiar dynamic of Gerry and Kate McCann, one parent steering the public conversation, the other drowning in grief. Both sets of parents were criticized for decisions that exposed their children to risk, leaving young kids unsupervised in unsecured locations. But it was in the realm of media strategy that the two families diverged dramatically. The McCanns launched a full-scale global campaign. They created Find Madeleine, raised over $2 million in donations, hired media consultants, and attracted support from celebrities and politicians, including David Beckham, J.K. Rowling, and even Pope Benedict XVI. Their image became inseparable from the case, commanding headlines and documentaries worldwide. The Sullivans, by contrast, lacked the resources, connections, or perhaps the will to mount such a campaign. There was no website, no charity fund, no celebrity endorsements. Their story faded quickly from the national spotlight, left to circulate in local forums and true crime blogs. This silence was interpreted in two opposing ways, either as a dignified refusal to exploit tragedy or as evidence that there was no narrative worth defending. In both cases, media presence, or absence, shaped public perception as much as evidence. While the McCanns were accused of manipulating the story, the Sullivans were criticized for not telling one at all. But the core suspicion remained. In stories defined by what's missing, silence, whether strategic or helpless, is never neutral. It speaks loudly. The McCann family's aggressive legal campaign against the British press stands as one of the most significant post-disappearance efforts to control narrative in modern media history. In the years following Madeleine's disappearance, the McCanns sued and won settlements from several tabloids, including The Sun and the Daily Express, for defamatory coverage and unfounded allegations of parental involvement. The total payout reached £55,000, later directed toward the search for Madeleine. More notably, The McCanns pursued legal action against former Portuguese detective Goncalo Amaral, whose book, The Truth of the Lie, accused them of staging a cover-up. While the McCanns initially won a ruling against Amaral, the decision was overturned in 2016 by Portugal's Supreme Court, reaffirming Amaral's right to publish his theory. The case underscored a critical tension. Were the McCanns defending their reputations or silencing dissent? In contrast, the Sullivan family had no such resources. Without legal teams or public relations consultants, they were left exposed to speculation and attack. Local media ran unchecked with contradictory narratives, some portraying the parents as grieving victims, others implying neglect or complicity. Lacking the financial or institutional backing to push back, the Sullivans' silence was read by some as guilt by omission. Yet both families became lightning rods for a divided public. Supporters saw them as victims of flawed investigations, trapped in systems that failed to deliver truth or justice. Critics, however, viewed their parenting choices, leaving young children unattended, as not merely reckless but potentially criminal. For every plea of compassion, there was an accusation of deception. For every defense mounted, a question unanswered. Ultimately, the legal and media strategies deployed, or avoided, by each family only deepened the ambiguity. The McCanns' polished, litigious approach was interpreted by some as control masking guilt, the Sullivans' quiet withdrawal as avoidance rooted in shame or powerlessness. Both responses created space for the same speculation, that the truth was being managed rather than revealed. In the absence of closure, public opinion became a courtroom of its own, one where behavior, not evidence, stood trial. And in both cases, the verdict is still being written. The global search for Madeleine McCann generated one of the most extensive and chaotic tip trails in modern criminal history. Over 8,000 reported sightings across more than 40 countries. From bustling European cities to remote border towns, the world seemed to be scanning every crowd for a glimpse of a little girl with one unmistakable feature, a coloboma, a rare defect in her right eye. This distinctive mark became the centerpiece of the "Look Into My Eyes" campaign, designed to make Madeleine's face instantly recognizable across continents. And yet, not a single credible sighting has ever been confirmed. Reports poured in from Belgium, Morocco, India, Paraguay, and dozens of other nations. Children matching Madeleine's general appearance were photographed, followed, and sometimes detained for questioning. In nearly every case, DNA testing or identity verification swiftly ruled them out. A Moroccan girl seen with an older woman on a roadside. A Belgian child in a convenience store. An Indian orphan spotted at a train station. All became momentary centers of hope, only to collapse under scrutiny. As the years wore on, a troubling pattern emerged. Some reports were found to be outright fabrications, invented by attention seekers or those hoping to profit from the media storm. Others were the product of misidentification, memory distortion, or wishful thinking. What some psychologists termed compassionate projection, where the public, primed by media exposure, began seeing Madeleine everywhere. The release of Netflix's 2019 documentary, The Disappearance of Madeleine McCann, only reignited the cycle. Tip lines spiked. Online theories multiplied. But still, no Madeleine. In the end, the very scale of the search may have worked against it. Flooded with noise, investigators were left chasing ghosts and shadows. The image of Madeleine, frozen in time with her eye defect prominently visible, became a symbol of absence, instantly recognizable, yet perpetually unfindable. The world had her face, but no one had her. The Sullivan case mirrored the McCann investigation in yet another frustrating way, a deluge of reported sightings that led nowhere. In the weeks following the disappearance of Lily and Jack, law enforcement agencies received hundreds of tips from neighboring states. Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, claiming the children had been spotted in malls, rest stops, and parks. One grainy CCTV clip from a Connecticut gas station even appeared to show two young children closely resembling Lily and Jack, accompanied by an unknown woman. The footage sparked a brief media frenzy, only to be dismissed days later after facial recognition analysis ruled out any match. As in the McCann case, the Sullivan investigation struggled with a patchwork of jurisdictions and sluggish data sharing. While Madeleine's image flashed across news screens worldwide, reports from countries in Asia and Africa often took days, sometimes weeks, to reach Portuguese authorities. Language barriers, bureaucratic delays, and inconsistent diplomatic channels rendered many leads functionally useless by the time they were reviewed. A similar breakdown occurred in the U.S., where the Sullivan investigation was split between local police, state agencies, and the FBI. Critical information, such as vehicle descriptions, timelines, and potential witness statements, was often siloed. With no centralized system for real-time integration, both cases were further hampered by the lack of a seamless international alert platform. While the U.S. operates the AMBER alert system domestically, there is no unified equivalent across Europe or globally. In Madeleine's case, that absence meant no automatic alerts at airports or land borders. In the Sullivan case, AMBER protocols were activated late, and by the time alerts were pushed to the public, hours had already been lost. The result in both cases was the same: time wasted, false hope ignited, and real leads buried under administrative inertia. In a world supposedly more connected than ever, both families found themselves trapped in the silence between jurisdictions. Technological limitations in the late 2000s played a silent but critical role in undermining both the McCann and Sullivan investigations. In the years following Madeleine McCann's disappearance, authorities attempted to harness facial recognition tools to process thousands of global sightings. But between 2007 and 2010, such software was rudimentary at best, plagued by inaccuracies, low-resolution imaging, and limited global integration. Progression images of Madeleine were not AI, generated as they would be today, but hand-drawn approximations by forensic artists. These sketches, however well-intentioned, left room for misidentification and fueled a wave of false leads that drained investigative resources without producing results. The Sullivan case, more recent but similarly constrained, suffered from the same digital shortcomings. Despite the proliferation of CCTV systems and digital surveillance across U.S. cities, there was no centralized mechanism to compare potential sightings of Lily and Jack against crowd footage, advanced image matching algorithms, facial heat maps, or real-time license plate tracking. Tools available to law enforcement today were either unavailable or underutilized at the time. This left investigators manually reviewing footage frame by frame, with limited ability to match against known profiles or cross-reference tips efficiently. Worse still, both cases were hamstrung by fractured databases. In the McCann investigation, data was scattered across multiple national agencies: Portuguese police, the UK's Operation Grange, and German prosecutors, each operating under separate legal frameworks and information-sharing protocols. The Sullivan case encountered a domestic version of the same issue. Police departments across state lines often failed to synchronize timelines or reconcile duplicate tips. Reports were misfiled, leads were repeated, and potential connections were lost in the noise. These breakdowns, unreliable sightings, disjointed coordination, and outdated tools, paint a grim picture of the fragility of transnational child search efforts. When time is critical, and truth is elusive, outdated systems and institutional silos don't just slow investigations. They may permanently obscure the answers. In both cases, the window to act may have existed, but the tools to see through it simply didn't. Launched in 2011 by London's Metropolitan Police, Operation Grange was initially heralded as a fresh start, an effort to re-examine the McCann case with the full weight of British law enforcement. Backed by political will and public sympathy, the operation received unprecedented funding for a missing child investigation, nearly £13.5 million over a decade. Dozens of officers combed through 4,000 documents, chased 8,000 leads, and reviewed potential sightings from more than 40 countries. Yet after more than a decade, Operation Grange failed to deliver a definitive breakthrough. By 2023, the operation's annual budget had dwindled to just £108,000, a quiet signal that leads were drying up and optimism was in retreat. In May 2023, one final push reignited public interest. A large-scale excavation at the Arade Dam in Portugal, based on GPS data allegedly linked to primary suspect Christian Bruckner. The site, which Bruckner had once referred to as "my little paradise," was scoured using ground-penetrating radar, drones, cadaver dogs, and expert divers. Over several days, the team recovered fragments of fabric and animal bones, but no human remains and, crucially, no DNA tied to Madeleine. The operation, though sophisticated, ended in silence. By January 2024, German prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters publicly acknowledged what had long been feared. There was no forensic evidence connecting Bruckner to the crime. Despite incriminating circumstantial details, a disturbing criminal history, a suspicious phone call, and damning testimonies, no charges could be filed. Bruckner remains imprisoned on unrelated charges, but is set for release in September 2025. Under German law, once acquitted of a crime, a suspect cannot be retried for the same offense without new and compelling evidence. A looming legal barrier that adds pressure with every passing month. As funding dries up and legal clocks tick down, Operation Grange appears to be fading into bureaucratic memory. The question now is not just who took Madeleine, but whether the truth, even if discovered, will ever be prosecutable. The Sullivan case, like the McCann investigation, became a study in costly failure and fractured cooperation. In 2006, a large-scale search was conducted in a dense forest region of western Massachusetts after a tipster reported seeing a suspicious pickup truck near the area around the time Lily and Jack disappeared. With helicopters, canine units, and dozens of personnel deployed, expectations were high. But after days of searching, the effort yielded nothing more than discarded household items and unrelated debris. No trace of the children was found. It was a logistical feat that ended in futility, eerily reminiscent of the 2023 Arade Dam excavation in Portugal, which, despite high-tech tools and international coordination, produced nothing but bones of animals and fabric scraps. Much like the tension between British and Portuguese authorities during Operation Grange, the Sullivan case was hampered by poor coordination between the FBI and local law enforcement. Jurisdictional disputes, information silos, and incompatible protocols led to delays and redundancies. Despite sharing a common goal, the agencies often acted in parallel rather than in concert, weakening the investigation from within. Both cases drew mounting criticism over their ballooning costs. Operation Grange consumed nearly £13.5 million, while the Sullivan search operations and federal involvement totaled several $100,000. And yet, in both instances, the return on investment was painfully thin. No arrests, no bodies, no closure. As the years passed and leads went cold, public faith in the investigative process began to erode. Commentators and citizens alike questioned whether law enforcement had been chasing shadows from the beginning. In the absence of new breakthroughs, both cases now teeter between unresolved tragedy and bureaucratic inertia, defined less by what was discovered and more by what was missed. The contradictions that define both the McCann and Sullivan cases, absent forensic evidence, failed large-scale searches, and the relentless ticking of legal and emotional clocks, underscore a grim possibility that the truth may remain forever out of reach. Years of investigation, millions in funding, and international headlines have produced more questions than answers. For all the manpower and media exposure, neither case has delivered closure, no convictions, no confirmed sightings, no bodies. The McCann family, still clinging to hope, maintains the website Find Madeleine, updating it periodically with appeals and age, progression images. Their campaign endures, a symbol of resilience or, to some, of desperation. In contrast, the Sullivan family has gradually withdrawn from public view, choosing privacy over continued exposure. Yet the weight of the unknown presses equally on both families. Each passing year deepens the silence, and with it, the ache of what might have been. In the end, these are not just stories of missing children, but of parents suspended in time, caught between memory and mystery. Justice remains elusive. So does truth. And the haunting absence left behind by Lily, Jack, and Madeleine continues to echo louder than any official verdict ever could. The McCann case laid bare a series of systemic failures that continue to haunt cross-border investigations. Chief among them was the failure to act decisively within the first 24 hours, a window widely regarded as the most critical in potential child abductions. No coordinated border alerts were issued. Airports and seaports remained unmonitored. There was no real-time communication between Portugal, the UK, and other EU nations. The lack of a unified international child alert system meant that by the time information was processed and disseminated, crucial leads may have already vanished across borders. Tensions between Portuguese and British authorities only deepened the cracks. Allegations emerged that the British government, under pressure from media and political circles, worked to shield the McCanns from more aggressive questioning. Portuguese police, in turn, were accused of leaking selective information to deflect blame and manage public perception. The result was a fractured investigation, where mistrust between agencies often overshadowed the search for truth. The Sullivan case, while domestic, suffered from a mirrored dysfunction. Local police were slow to treat the disappearance as a criminal matter, losing precious early hours. When the FBI stepped in, data sharing protocols with state and municipal agencies proved inefficient. Key information was siloed, leading to redundant efforts and missed opportunities. In both cases, the early response was defined not by urgency, but by confusion. Delayed alerts, jurisdictional friction, and poor coordination squandered the very hours that might have made a difference. Behind the headlines and speculation lies a harsher reality. Even in developed nations, child disappearance investigations remain alarmingly vulnerable to institutional inertia. The failure wasn't just in finding the children, it was in building a system prepared to act before they vanished. Public opinion remains deeply divided in both the McCann and Sullivan cases, driven by contradictions that persist despite years of scrutiny. In Madeleine McCann's case, her coloboma, a rare defect in her right eye, was heavily publicized as a unique identifier. Yet not a single confirmed sighting ever referenced this distinct feature. The absence of photographic or eyewitness confirmation has led some to question whether the coloboma was visible at all, or whether it was concealed, intentionally or not, in subsequent imagery. This missing detail, while seemingly minor, casts a long shadow over thousands of unverified tips. In the Sullivan case, a single boot print found near the family's vacation home added similar ambiguity. The print didn't match the parents, known visitors, or any registered suspects. Yet it also failed to provide a usable lead. No name, no match, no forensic link. Instead of narrowing the investigation, it deepened the uncertainty. Both cases now float in the same murky space where plausible theories, accidental death and cover-up, planned abduction, or parental complicity, all coexist without resolution. Each explanation has enough circumstantial support to be considered, but none has the decisive evidence required to close the case. In that void, public speculation has flourished, often fueled by emotion rather than fact. The result is not just legal limbo, but narrative paralysis. With no verdict, the truth becomes subjective, crafted from suspicion, behavior, and belief. And in both stories, the absence of proof has become its own kind of presence, haunting, heavy, and enduring. The McCann family has become a polarizing symbol in the global consciousness. For some, they represent the enduring pain of parents trapped in an investigation that failed them, victims of bureaucratic incompetence and a faceless predator. For others, their decision to leave 3 young children unattended in an unlocked apartment is seen not as a mistake, but as the first step in a chain of avoidable negligence, if not outright guilt. The debate is less about what happened and more about what kind of people the McCanns are, and whether they deserve sympathy, suspicion, or both. The Sullivan family, lacking the financial resources and media machinery that surrounded the McCanns, faced even harsher public scrutiny. Their absence from high-profile interviews and their limited legal pushback made them appear passive or evasive. Without a communication strategy, their silence was filled by others, pundits, bloggers, and online theorists. But beneath the surface lies a deeper bias. Both families were caught in the framework of the Missing white girl syndrome, a term used to describe the disproportionate media attention given to missing white children, particularly girls, over other demographics or lower-profile cases. The McCann case became a global phenomenon. The Sullivan case faded into local memory. This disparity reveals how media dynamics, racial and class assumptions, and geographic proximity to power can shape the pursuit of justice. More importantly, it underscores how easily complex tragedies are reduced to public theater. The failures of international coordination, of forensic clarity, and of equitable coverage did more than stall investigations. They transformed both cases into cautionary tales, not just about missing children, but about systems that fracture under pressure, and about how, in the court of public opinion, justice is too often a matter of access, not truth. Disappearance of Madeleine McCann stands as one of the most expensive missing persons investigations in modern history, with costs exceeding £13 million. Yet despite global attention, the case remains unresolved, burdened by contradictions that continue to frustrate any pursuit of justice. The timeline of the evening she vanished remains murky. Critical items, like a refrigerator and a tennis bag, disappeared without explanation. Forensic evidence was inconclusive, interview behavior sparked suspicion, and primary suspects, including Christian Bruckner, could not be legally tied to the crime. Even Madeleine's coloboma, a rare and highly identifiable eye defect, failed to appear in any of the 8,000 reported sightings, raising disturbing questions about whether her appearance had been altered, or if the reports themselves were driven more by media hysteria than fact. The Sullivan case, though far less publicized, suffered from similar complications: conflicting clues, a boot print, a suspicious vehicle, and vague CCTV footage. Each hinted at possibility, but none led to resolution. The investigation was hampered by weak coordination between local police and federal agencies. Critical hours were lost due to slow response and poor information sharing. While the scale was smaller, the pattern was familiar: fragmented leads, institutional breakdowns, and rising public frustration. Both cases reflect the painful limits of even the most resource-intensive investigations. When timelines collapse, physical evidence disappears, and agencies fail to coordinate, the result is not just an unsolved case, it's a system exposed. And for the families left behind, the cost is not only financial, but existential: years spent waiting, searching, and wondering whether justice will ever find its way through the noise. In both stories, the real tragedy may not be the disappearance, but how little remains to bring the truth to light. Both the McCann and Sullivan cases lay bare the same systemic vulnerabilities: delayed response in the critical first hours, poor cross-agency coordination, and outdated or underutilized technology. Despite the scale of their respective investigations, the core question remains agonizingly unresolved. Were these families hiding an unthinkable accident, or were they victims of predators who vanished without a trace? Suspects like Christian Bruckner and Martin Nee offered compelling narratives, both with criminal records, proximity to the crime scenes, and disturbing behavioral profiles. Yet in both cases, the absence of forensic evidence has rendered prosecution impossible. Bruckner, despite global headlines and years of suspicion, remains uncharged in Madeleine's case and is due for release in 2025 unless new evidence emerges. Nee, never formally questioned in the McCann investigation, remains an unsettling outlier. And in the Sullivan case, the lone external suspect remains nameless, just a vague shadow linked to a boot print and a passing truck. Never identified, never found. As the years pass and leads grow cold, the truth about Madeleine, Lily, and Jack drifts further into the realm of speculation. The families remain in limbo, their lives frozen in a moment that refuses to resolve. What began as urgent manhunts have become cautionary tales about how evidence decays, how institutions falter, and how mysteries endure not because they are unsolvable, but because they were never given the right conditions to be solved. And in that silence, the possibility grows that some truths are never meant to be uncovered. The McCann case, spotlighted by global media, and the Sullivan case, lost in quiet obscurity, converge on a haunting legacy: no bodies, no confessions, no justice. Despite vast differences in visibility and resources, both investigations end in the same void, an absence not just of resolution, but of understanding. The families remain suspended between hope and despair, condemned to relive the same unanswered questions. Was it an accident hidden in panic, a predator cloaked in silence, or something more elusive still? In the end, these cases leave behind more than missing children. They leave a warning that truth, when mismanaged, delayed, or denied, can vanish just as completely as the ones we search for. And perhaps that is the cruelest outcome of all: not just a child lost, but the slow, steady erosion of certainty itself. Sometimes, truth is the hardest thing to find, and the easiest to lose.